also mentioned in your first session at Integrate, you talked about the business process tracking. Can you talk a bit more about that and what that is?
Sure. So business process tracking, we'll do a little bit of throwback to BizTalk.
Mm,
So for people that are familiar with BizTalk, there was that feature called BAM, Business Activity Monitoring. You can kind of think of this in a similar light.
mm,
So the idea is that you've got key business data that you want to be able to extract, and you want to then be able to build sort of experiences on that data itself. And so obviously when we talk about BizTalk and even logic apps, right? There's a tremendous amount of like verbose technical information.
mm,
You go into run history, you look at inputs, outputs, and you can kind of see a lot of data, which is great. Like it really helps you in troubleshooting. But if you're trying to sort of like focus on what's really important, how do you then go ahead and sort of make that data available? And so I think what ends up happening is that a lot of people have to then build custom solutions, or they have to like instrument their solution to capture that key data itself. So they're making changes in their actual workflow to emit these logs to somewhere. Maybe they're using like the track properties feature. Maybe they're using a custom solution, a custom connector, or maybe they're just logging to a database. And what we wanted to do was to whole simplify that whole sort of mechanism. We wanted to make sure that what we did sat on top of the workflow itself. We didn't want to inject things into the workflow. Number one, like there's a lot of logic apps that have been deployed. We don't want people to have to go back and retrofit and do a bunch of work for each workflow to take advantage of this. The other thing that was really important to us was reliable delivery and guaranteed delivery as well. So if you think about solutions like application insights or even log analytics,
mm,
they are good solutions. But in my opinion, I don't really feel like they are the best. I don't think they were built with integration in mind. And that's just my personal opinion.
mm,
And what I mean by that is, I think their sweet spot is if you think about resources like resource utilization, or even like say a web app. A web app, you're able to capture, hey, I got a request. I've got X many requests over the past hour, over the last minute, and then what is sort of my performance characteristics over that load. But rarely do you see anything about the payload of what those web apps are doing, right? But with integration, that's all we care about. Is we care about
mm,
payloads. We care, like, if you lose a message, that's a big deal. Like that could be a purchase order, that could be a lab requisition, that could be turning someone's power off or on, that could be billing. Like it's hugely critical. And so, sometimes we do get asked, well, hey, why didn't you use App Insights, or why didn't you use Log Analytics? And the reality is that those solutions do rate sampling. So just go into your favorite web browser, type in application insights, type in rate sampling, and you might be a little bit surprised to see what you find. The reality is some of those solutions can drop requests because of throughput. And it's one of those things that's not going to drop the transaction, but it will basically drop the trace event or like the log event. And so then you get into situations where, hey, I'm looking for a track property, but I don't find it. Why? And the reality is, under significant load, those things can be dropped. And what they will do, because they're more interested in the performance characteristics, like what is my top end percentile of how long a request took, they will do aggregation
mm,
on those requests. So they can give you the statistic, but they can't give you the actual event itself. And that's by design. Those solutions were built for performance. They weren't built for verbosity. They weren't built for the individual transaction. And that, I think, is one of the benefits of business process tracking, and part of the reason why we used ADX, Azure Data Explorer. And so sometimes people say, well, why did you use that? There were cheaper alternatives. But for us, we weren't interested in the potential of messages being dropped. And so what we've got is reliable
mm,
ingestion on the ADX front. And we actually take advantage of our
mm,
existing tracking jobs that take place in the actual runtime itself to push those events to ADX. And sort
mm,
of why I'm talking about ADX, I think that's part of the value prop. But at the end of the day, the real value is how do you then expose this data to your business stakeholders. And stakeholders can mean many things. It could be inside of IT, you might have business analysts, you might have the integration team, or you could have people directly in the business unit that you're supporting. And you want to be able to expose this. And so what we've done is we've created an experience in the Azure portal that allows you to define a conceptual business process based upon different stages. Like stage one is like order received. Stage two is let's check inventory. Okay, was it in inventory? Yes, great. Was it in inventory? No. Okay, let's go down a different path. In
Yeah.
the case that it was in inventory, let's start to like fulfill that order. Let's start to ship that order. And so now you can model a conceptual business process. And for each of those stages,
Mm.
we can go ahead and say, hey, what are the data that we want to actually capture at that particular stage?
Mm.
And then what we'll do is we'll create this overlay that will basically give you this like red light, green light show
Mm.
that'll say, hey, I went down this particular path from a business process perspective and everything is healthy.
Mm.
Or I went down this other path and there's an exception or a failure. Now, the failure could be for technical reasons
Mm.
or it could be for business reasons like, hey, we're out of stock for this particular item. We should probably like let someone know about that,
Mm.
and then we can start to flag it from that perspective. And the other thing I would say is about our platform, and this is, once again, I'd say deliberate, is with ADX, it's a customer's data repository. It's basically bring your own ADX instance.
Mm.
And so that creates many opportunities. Number one, some people will say, well, hey, like your experience is in the Azure portal. We don't allow business users to the Azure portal. That's fair.
Mm.
So what's a tool that, business users typically like to use? Oh, Power BI. So
Mm.
it's your data. We're not trying to lock it up. We're not trying to monetize it. You know, Here, create a Power BI dashboard, and then go ahead and build an experience on top of that. And so that's something that I've got kind of on the side. I've got it started. I haven't published it yet, but some sample templates to get people started that would allow you to go ahead and to use these things, and then be able to share that with their business users and allow the business user to then go use that. The data comes to the business user instead of the business user going to the data. So that's another piece that we are focused on. And I would say just one other thing about this is I don't think as an integration community,
Mm.
we spend enough time talking about business value.
Mm.
I think, what I did learn during my few years there on the RPA side is that segment of integration is very focused on business value. And I feel like this business process tracking is kind of like dipping our toe into like that area where it's like, hey, let's focus on the business value
Mm.
of these transactions as well. And so I think that's something that someone could also sort of build on top of to be able to say, hey, like, what is the actual value? Like, when this process runs,
Mm.
what is the value of that? And now you've got all the data. You can start to do some pretty simple math that says, like, hey, like, what are the benefits that we're now getting
Mm.
from using integration, as opposed to us being very focused on sort of back office nuts and bolts, NuGet package this, schema version that. The
Mm.
business doesn't care. So like I also want, I'd love to see us as a community sort of up level and really start focus on business value as opposed to just like, hey, we're in the back room connecting all of these protocols together,
Yeah.
and start focusing more on outcomes.